a good tone? Yes? Okay. I don't have my glasses. I have the ones for distance, and I forgot the ones for reading, but my friend Maria Belén, muchas gracias por prestarme sus glasses. It's a little bit like, being in a impressionist painting, but I'm going to do my best. Así que, disculpe que me voy a leer la presentación un poquito despacito porque estos no son mis anteojos. Gracias. Ruth Behar is celebrated for being an anthropologist who revolutionized the field of cultural anthropology through her compassionate approach to her subjects. She is a professor at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and the author of several nonfiction books dealing with travels to Spain, Mexico, and Cuba. The recipient of several prestigious awards, including a Guggenheim and a MacArthur Fellowship, Ruth is a respected contributor to journals like the New York Times, the Huffington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post, as well as a popular public lecturer across the globe. Although Ruth had reached the highest accolades in her professional field, she often admitted to me that her dream of success had eluded her. She wanted to be a creative writer. This wish was granted with the recent publication of a book of poetry, Everything I Kept, Todo Lo Que Guardé, and 2 novels for young adults. Her debut young adult novel, Lucky Broken Girl, won the 2018 Puré Author Award from the American Library Association, and translations are forthcoming in Spanish, Italian, Romanian, and Chinese. Ruth's newest novel, Letters from Cuba, will be released this August, and we have some of her books. She has many more books here with us, which she brought, and we'll be selling at cost after the lecture. También tenemos sus libros y lo vamos a vender a costo después de la lectura. But what isn't listed among Ruth Behar's credentials is her greatest talent. She is a gifted story listener. It is her generous attention to others and genuine humility that elicits people's trust. This has served her brilliantly as an anthropologist and now, most especially, as a creative writer. We are very fortunate to have her back in San Miguel. Please help me welcome the extraordinary Ruth Behar.
Gracias, Sandra. Thank you, Sandra, for that beautiful, beautiful introduction. I'm so happy to be here. Mexico is one of the homes of my heart, and being here in San Miguel is so incredible. So grateful to Sandra for being a friend for more than 2 decades and an incredible mentor to me too as I make this transition into being a creative writer. So grateful for her friendship and so blessed by it. And I want to also thank everybody that's been involved with the Penn series and with bringing me here, particularly Signe Hammer, who's been so wonderful in organizing everything. I also want to thank Yunuen Vital for the translation, and Lucina Kathman as well, and everybody involved with the Penn Lecture Series here in San Miguel. Thank you to everybody. And thanks to all of you, the audience here tonight. I'm so grateful to all of you for coming out. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí esta noche. So I'm going to begin with a poem. How is this volume? Is this good? Okay, great. So I'm going to begin with a poem called Prayer, or Rezo in Spanish, which can serve as an invocation for the theme of searching for home. Too often, I am on my way home, driving down familiar streets, only a few blocks to go, and out of nowhere, a merciless hand comes and wrings my heart dry. I tremble, fog clouds my eyes, I am no longer sure if I am awake or dreaming. If I die, who will find me? All I can do is pray. Don't take me yet. Let me return home. I'm almost there. Please? I don't know why this happens. What I know is that so far my prayers have been answered. Hardly breathing, I reach my house, and when I open the door, I hear many keys clanging, the keys my ancestors stubbornly took with them to their exile. Now, because I was born in Cuba, I'm going to also read it in Spanish, which is my mother tongue. Rezo. Esto me pasa con frecuencia, con demasiada frecuencia. Voy camino a casa, manejando por calles conocidas. Faltan solamente unas pocas cuadras y de no sé dónde viene una mano despiadada y exprime mi corazón hasta dejarlo seco. Tiemblo, una neblina tapa mis ojos. No puedo saber ya si estoy despierta o soñando. Si me muero, ¿quién me encontrará? Lo único que puedo hacer es rezar. No vengas por mí aún, déjame volver a casa, ya casi llego, por favor. No sé por qué me pasa esto, solo sé que por ahora mis rezos han sido escuchados. Dejando casi de respirar, llego a mi casa. Al abrir la puerta, oigo el ruido de tantas llaves, las llaves que mis antepasados neciamente llevaron con ellos a su exilio. Thank you. Good. Okay, great. This is exciting, the translation. So we are all familiar with the cliche that home is where the heart is. But these days, our hearts are in many places. As Pico Iyer puts it, home now has less to do with a piece of soil than a piece of soul. We associate home with shelter, rest, and refuge, and the foods of our childhood that gave us comfort, whether that was a pastelito de guayaba, a warm corn tortilla, a samosa, an onigiri rice ball. But in our age of global displacement, of extreme and constant mobility, of borders and walls, of compassion fatigue toward refugees and immigrants, is home an expired concept? It is mind-boggling to think that over 244 million people are residing outside the country of their birth. This is also an age in which more than 1 billion people travel for leisure each year. Immigrants on desperate journeys rub shoulders with tourists seeking adventure in places they deem exotic. While a tourist swoons riding in an old Chevy convertible in Havana, an immigrant child from Syria named Alan Kurdi drowns in the Mediterranean Sea. There is great irony in the way a few can travel and consume the world in luxury, while masses of refugees yearn to be able to work to build a home where they can live in dignity and rest their heads at night and dream. Climate change has rapidly entered into our notion of home. We have witnessed the displacement and destruction caused by hurricanes, earthquakes, unstoppable wildfires. Homes flooded, burned to the ground, fallen to ruin, homes gone in the blink of an eye. In these last few years, thousands have lost every last possession in Houston, Mexico, Puerto Rico, California, Australia. And there is the homesickness, the eternal exile so many are feeling as webs of political lies enshroud American democracy and autocratic rulers challenge democracies throughout the world. Even those who've never left home share in the unsettledness of the immigrant experience. I can't offer a cure for our homesickness, but I'm going to try today to suggest ways in which, through both real and fictional journeys, we can open our hearts and minds to new ways of thinking about belonging in the world. For women, home was traditionally an imprisoning doll's house, but when a woman can occupy the self-made room of her own that Virginia Woolf wrote of, home can be a place of freedom from which to be and to write. Writers, as we know, find their way home in language, in the words we use to build a sturdy edifice to contain our most fragile stories, dreams, and fears. Speaking of fears, you may have noticed from my poem, Prayer, Rezo, that the feeling of being lost, of not knowing if I'll find my way home, the crippling uncertainty that overcomes me is an inseparable part of my identity. Why am I afraid? We now know, according to the emerging field of epigenetics, that ancestral and cultural histories etch themselves into our bodies and psyches for generations. I've come to understand that my search for home stems from my experience of having lost my first home as a young child, and I also carry the weight of homes lost by ancestors. All my writing as an ethnographer, poet, fiction writer is an effort to heal that loss. My first home was in Cuba. That's where my parents were born and where I and my brother were born. We were born in Cuba because all four of my Jewish grandparents chanced to migrate to the island in the 1920s. Abuela, my paternal grandmother, a Sephardic Jew, came from a town near Istanbul. Her parents arranged for her to sail to Havana and wed a wealthy Sephardic Jew, also from Turkey, but he grew impatient for her to arrive and married another woman. Probably is all for the best. An uncle in Havana took her in. To pass the time, she sang Sephardic love songs and played the oud, songs like Adio, Adio querida, attracting the moody man who was to become my abuelo, my paternal grandfather. Abuelo, for his part, had left the same town in Turkey to escape conscription into Ataturk's army. Being Sephardic Jews, my paternal grandparents viewed themselves as exiled people, part of the vast community of Jews who left Spain after the expulsion in 1492, refusing to convert to Catholicism. And yet, though expelled, they held on to the Spanish language and their nostalgia for Spain. Arriving in Cuba, Abuela and Abuelo communicated in Ladino, and their ancient Spanish could be understood by Cubans. And living by the sea in Havana reminded them of the Marmara and Black Seas of Turkey. Baba, who you see here, my maternal grandmother, fled impoverishment and anti-Semitism in Poland to join her father, the first in the family to arrive in Cuba. From Poland, she wrote him a letter begging to be allowed to go to Cuba. He wanted her younger brother to go before her, thinking that as a boy, he would work harder. But she convinced him that she would be the one to save the family. Baba took it upon herself to work and sacrifice to get her mother and 6 siblings out of Poland. Thanks to her efforts, they arrived in Cuba on the eve of the war and were spared an almost certain death in the Holocaust. This story of a young girl's bravery is the inspiration for my new novel, Letters from Cuba. Soon after arriving in Cuba, Baba found a job in the general store of the shy man who would become my Zayde, my maternal grandfather. He noticed that she loved to read the Yiddish newspapers, and he ordered them from New York to charm her. Zayde was from a logging town in Russia. After his father tumbled from his horse and broke his skull, his mother couldn't support him, so his older sister urged him to join her in Buenos Aires, where she had settled. She awaited him at the port, but he ended up in Havana. When he insisted to the authorities that he needed to get to Buenos Aires, they told him he had two choices: stay in Havana or go back to Russia. Naturally, he stayed and took the first job he found, working on the railroad, and I lost my chance to be born in Argentina, the land of the tango. He and his sister didn't meet again until they were retired with grandchildren. By then, Seda was an immigrant a second time, entering the United States as a person of unsettled nationality, a description many of us might identify with today. See the document there. El documento. Okay. These stories about how my grandparents found their way to Cuba may seem enchanting, but there was a racist history underpinning their emigration to the island. Like many European Jews, they wished to go to the United States, but the door was closed. Starting at the end of the 19th century and reaching its peak in the 1920s, the rise of anti-immigrant ideology in the U.S. led to the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924, the same year the U.S. Border Patrol was established. This bill imposed a quota system that limited the number of immigrants entering from Southern and Eastern Europe, millions of whom had made their way to the U.S. at the end of the 19th century, as reflected, see that there, in the anti-Semitic cartoons of the time. The stage was set for the rise of white nationalism today. Ironically, after the Cuban Revolution, when Fidel Castro came to power and imposed communism on the island, my Jewish Cuban family became desirable immigrants. Arriving in the United States in the 1960s at the height of the Cold War, we and other Cubans were seen as refugees from communism. Our presence was proof that the Cuban Revolution had failed and American capitalism was a superior way of life. And this picture, this picture right here, that's my grandmother that I've been mentioning, the maternal grandmother, Baba, leaving Cuba. Mi abuela materna cuando se fue de Cuba. I grew up in New York, speaking Spanish at home and learning English in school, immersed in a Jewish-Cuban cocoon of family and friends, and also rubbing shoulders with immigrants from everywhere. A life-changing event took place shortly after we arrived from Cuba. When I was 10, we were in a terrible car accident in New York, and I spent a year in bed in a body cast, recovering from a severe leg injury, a trauma I revisit in my novel, Lucky Broken Girl. Immobile, I dreamed of movement, of one day being a woman without a country, a vagabond, a dancer, a writer telling the stories of her travels. In my senior year in college, I stumbled into a cultural anthropology class and decided to get my PhD. I was astonished to learn that a profession existed where you spent long stretches of time living somewhere else and eventually returned home to tell the tale of your journey. I was drawn to these voluntary periods of exile that anthropologists embarked upon. Anthropology gave me permission to become an immigrant writer, to continually be in situations where I felt an immigrant sense of vulnerability and impermanence, and search for moments of connection with strangers. In anthropology, I became the grown-up immigrant child who made homesickness a profession, who kept reliving the experience of displacement. That's how I ended up living in a small village in northern Spain, then in a town in Mexico in San Luis Potosí, eventually finding my way to Cuba and coming to understand my family's sorrow about the island they'd lost. Everywhere I went, I was treated with goodwill and generosity. My travels showed me the kindness in the world. I was very young, just 21, when I first went to the village of Santa Maria del Monte del Condado in the northern Spanish province of León. People would ask, "What do you want with us here?" What do you want with us here? I want to observe your lives. I want to listen to your stories. I remember Maria Rivero, one of the first people I met in the village, asking, "And if you die here, what shall we do?" That's a good question. I didn't know what to say. Wasn't I too young to die? She replied, "Don't worry. If you die, we'll bury you in our cemetery." Easy, fácil. I found myself in the company of aging farmers who had an intimate relationship to the earth. People raised rabbits, chickens, pigs, sheep, and cows in stables that were within their houses. There was no telephone, and you went to the bathroom in the stable with the cows. Growing up in New York City, I had never been in such close company to cows. I was taken in like a granddaughter, and as such, I was expected to work the land. I learned how much it hurt my kidneys to pull potatoes out of the ground. The summer months were occupied with gathering hay, harvesting wheat and rye, caring for vegetable gardens, and picking pears, cherries, and apples, ending with the grape harvest. The grape harvest. Winters, besides being long, were bitterly cold. You stayed in the kitchen most of the day because it was the only heated room. Franco had died in 1975, and Spain was trying to rise from the ashes of years of dictatorship. It was 1978 when I began my field work. A rural exodus had taken place before my arrival, and the children and grandchildren of the farmers I met had left the countryside to begin new lives in Madrid and other cities. The farmers felt abandoned. Out of nowhere, I appeared, asking for their stories, wanting to bear witness to their efforts to remain on the land at a moment when it seemed foolish and backward to grow your own food in little villages. It would take years for the organic food movement to emerge and for there to develop awareness about protecting the beauty of local spaces and customs. The villagers I met felt no pride. They were ashamed and humiliated to be working like brutes on the land, como brutos, they would say. I was drawn to them and their rootedness, something I lacked and longed for, I who come from a lineage of immigrant ancestors. I worried that my book about the village had not done sufficient justice to the lives of the people I knew then. But now in Spanish, the book has become a resource for the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the villagers I lived with 40 years ago and for others in Spain. The pictures I took of the people and their everyday lives, about 2,000 pictures, were scanned and are in the possession of the village and have become part of its intangible heritage. They have been posted on the website for the village, created by Fran Llamazares, the grandson of Maria Rivero, and are treasured because no one has pictures of their families from that era. On a recent trip to Spain, I was in the city of León with Fran Llamazares, having tapas at a bar when a young man came in. "It's Toño, the grandson of Amparo," Fran said. Toño grew up in Madrid, taken there by his parents who were part of the rural exodus to the cities. He'd married, had a child, and become a chef. Now he was back in León with his family and planning to renovate his grandmother's house and move to the village. We chatted about reverse migration, and then I asked Fran and Toño if I could take a picture of them. I took a closer look at Toño's tattoos. On his right arm, he had tattooed the chef, but on his left arm, coming up, I saw an image that was familiar. As he held up his arm, I realized I knew the image. It was a replica of a photograph I had taken in 1984. Should be coming up. There. I always printed the pictures I took and gave them to the people I photographed. Now, one of these photographs had ended up etched into the flesh of a grandson who had grown up in the city, far from the rural life of the grandmother I came to know through my fieldwork. Toño was searching for home, just as I was through my anthropology, and our paths had crossed in the most beautiful way. Let's see if, maybe next slide, you can see. Isn't that amazing?
What is that animal?
Oh, it's not an animal. So that's his grandmother bent over a sifter.
I saw a table with a dog, sorry.
That's the traditional way to separate the wheat from the chaff. They would use that sifter, and so he took that picture and put it on his body. It was amazing. That's anthropology coming full circle. El círculo de la antropología y estos contactos tan increíbles que hacemos con el pasado y el presente, these connections that we make between past and present that are so amazing. So next, in Mexico, I spent several years in the 80s and 90s living in the town of Mezquitic in San Luis Potosí. Mezquitic está en la carretera on the highway going to Zacatecas. There, I met a street peddler named Esperanza Hernandez. She was outspoken, and I found her very intimidating at first. But she convinced me that she had the most interesting life story of any woman in the town. I was interviewing a lot of women in the town. She said, no, don't bother with that. I have the most interesting story, and she convinced me. She challenged me to write a book big enough to encompass everything she'd experienced. Hunger, poverty, neglect, parental violence, domestic violence, the death of her babies from consuming the rage that poisoned her breast milk. She would talk about el coraje, this rage that she would carry and she was passing on inadvertently to her babies. And being named a witch by her neighbors because her husband, her abusive husband, went blind after he left her. Everybody said, tiene que ser una bruja. She had found strength by appealing to the spirit of Pancho Villa, as you see, and found redemption by recognizing that her life was a story worth telling. Translated Woman, the book I wrote, later translated into Spanish under the title Cuéntame algo aunque sea una mentira, was about how her story traveled across the border with me and what it meant that she'd chosen me as the keeper of her story. Esperanza never let me forget that I could cross the border easily while she could not. She opened my eyes to the open wound of the U.S.-Mexico border. She couldn't read or write, but was a talented oral storyteller. It was mesmerizing to listen to her. Her rage, her irreverence, her criticism of the society in which she lived taught me to be braver. In opening herself to me, she helped me find the voice to do the writing I had been longing to do, honest, poetic, political, and personal. I was fortunate to be able to say farewell to Esperanza before her death in October 2014. Initially, she had feared the gossip of her neighbors and had asked me to take her story to el otro lado, take it to the other side, and translate it into English so the gringos could read it. That's what she would say. But later she changed her mind and asked me to publish the book in Spanish, which I did. As she was dying, she said how glad she was that her story was enshrined in a book. Ours was a complex exchange, but the serendipity of our crossing paths had created something magical. Two women, dos comadres, una cubana y una mexicana, as different as could be, giving voice to each other, a duet of strangers joined together by the written word. After years of living in Spain and Mexico, it was time to reclaim Cuba. This photograph, that's me with my maternal grandparents. That's the grandmother I've been talking about, Baba. So after years of living in Spain and Mexico, it was time to reclaim Cuba. Being Cuban-born and the child of exiles, the decision to return was wrenching. It required fortitude to turn my back on my family and not feel I was acting monstrously in choosing to visit the island they had left under duress. Truth be told, I was terrified most of the time I was in Cuba. At the beginning, I had anxiety attacks, I had heart palpitations, I was dizzy, I cried, I had nightmares. Ghosts followed me as I walked the streets of La Habana, trying to trace the footsteps of my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. Would I disappear into an alley and never be heard from again? But there were moments when I felt strangely safe, as if an angel were watching over me, and I'd say to myself, nothing bad could ever happen to me here. This is where I was born. All I wanted at first was to stand in the places where I had stood as a child, as if I could somehow reclaim those places by inhabiting them again in my adult body. Poems were all I could write at first. I was fortunate to meet at the beginning of my journey to Cuba a great artist, Rolando Esteves, who makes handmade books and who became a mentor to me. I told him about my poems and he said he wanted to read them, but they needed to be in Spanish. That set me into a new phase of my work, writing poems in English and Spanish and collaborating with Esteves on handmade books he designed and illustrated, giving my words an artistic home in Cuba. These books included Poems Returned to Cuba, Poemas que vuelven a Cuba, Everything I Kept, Todo lo que guardé, which has, as you can see here, a two-dimensional suitcase on the cover. And just to let you know, so in this picture, when you open the suitcase, it's really interesting. It has sand inside. So cuando abres la maleta, esta maleta que está en la portada del libro, te encuentras con arena. So that sand that is inside this book is sand from Varadero Beach. Es arena de la playa de Varadero. That's the beach where my parents honeymooned. Es la playa donde mis padres fueron a su luna de miel. And so my friend Rolando Esteves went to Varadero to get this sand to put it inside the book. So, entonces mi amigo Esteves fue a Varadero a conseguir esta arena y ponerla dentro del libro. O sea, es un pedazo de Cuba. And anyway, and just inside there's also a picture of me and Dulce Maria Loinaz, the Cuban poet who's a big inspiration for my poetry. So una foto mía y de Dulce Maria Loinaz, gran inspiración para mi poesía. Ok. También, so another book, otro libro más, another book, The Broken Streets of My City, Las Calles Rotas de mi Ciudad, where I imagined myself going to Havana with my parents who've never been back and holding their hands as we walk through the broken streets of our city. Well, as you can see, the streets are very broken in Havana, and one day I fell on the street, and that was what inspired me to write this poem. Las calles de La Habana en realidad están muy rotas y me caí, y eso me inspiró a escribir este poema sobre todas las cosas que están rotas en Cuba. So it inspired me to write about all the things that seem to be broken in Cuba. And you can see the books better here, and Esteves also colored in this black and white photograph and made it quite beautiful. I don't know if you can see this detail. So it's a tear coming out of the face, and then it becomes It says Cuba, and then there's a Jewish star at the end of it. So bringing all of these things together. So I've imagined going to Havana with my parents and holding their hands as we walk through the broken streets of our city. Here's a little extract from the poem, Mami, Papi, please come back, walk these broken streets of our Havana together with me. Listen to me, your niña vieja, let me lead you through these broken streets. Mami, papi, por favor, vuelvan a caminar conmigo por estas calles rotas de nuestra Habana. Escuchen a su niña vieja, Les quiero guiar por estas calles rotas. So having my poems housed in an Esteves handmade book, several Esteves handmade books, was a crucial step of my homecoming to Cuba, and I will always be grateful for it. On my visits, I wandered into synagogues in Havana, mostly out of curiosity, to see what Jewish memories survived amid years of revolution. And just to add, so before the revolution, there was a community of about 20,000 Jews in Cuba. Now there's a community of about 1,000. Entonces, antes de la revolución había más o menos 20,000 judíos en Cuba y ahora hay más o menos 1,000 solamente. So I would wander into these synagogues in Havana out of curiosity to see what Jewish memories survived amid years of revolution. Gradually, a book, An Island Called Home, Una Isla Llamada Hogar, emerged. It took the form of a series of vignettes exploring moments of epiphany in my encounters with Jews on the island, in whose presence I felt, there, but for the grace of God, go I. I documented how Jews in Cuba kept material objects as markers of their Jewish identity. They held up for my gaze the Jewish relics they had saved. A photograph, you see at the top, of the last quinceañera celebrated at the Jewish Community Center in Havana in 1959, the year the revolution began. The prayer shawl, or talit, that belonged to a grandfather from Turkey. A postcard sent from a concentration camp to a rural Cuban town, one of the most surreal and haunting discoveries. That last image at the bottom. There I was, the immigrant writer, returning home to the island, knowing I would say goodbye to Cuba again, but grateful others were staying put so I might have a Jewish world to return to. I continue to return to Cuba. I'm there 2 or 3 times a year. A strange situation given that my parents, now in their mid-80s, have never returned, nor has my brother. There's always a touch of fear when I'm there, the inherited paranoia of having fled Cuba and fearing they'll not let me out again. At the same time, I feel boundless joy in Cuba, joy I've not felt anywhere else. I laugh and love myself laughing there, to borrow Zora Hurston's phrase. I'll always feel a little ambivalent about Cuba, but I won't stop going back. After years of going on real journeys to real places, now in the latest phase of my writing career, I have moved into fiction, giving myself permission to go on imaginary journeys and invent and elaborate and add a little magic. The magic is there because I'm writing for young people, these young adult novels, and they need stories that offer hope. And I too need stories that offer hope. I'm allowed to get inside the minds and the bodies of my characters, and I can even put words in the mouths of my characters, something I couldn't do as an anthropologist. That's a very, very much of a no-no in anthropology. In my novel, Like a Broken Girl, I imagine what my mother was feeling up there after we arrived from Cuba, how she longed to wear polka dot dresses and high-heeled shoes and dance the cha-cha-cha. But instead, she had to take care of me, a bedridden daughter. In my upcoming letters from Cuba, I imagine my maternal grandmother, Esther, as a young woman arriving to the island of palm trees and sugarcane with a mission to save her family in Poland, and how it felt for her to fall in love with the warmth and light of Cuba, but not be able to fully enjoy it, knowing the rest of her siblings and her mother were depending on her to get them out on the eve of World War II. In conclusion, I want to share an anecdote about my grandmother, this grandmother. Because she was forced to toughen up as a young woman to be able to save her family, she always looked down on female relatives and friends who were too delicate, too easily depressed. She could drown in a glass of water, she would say scornfully, ella se ahoga en un vaso de agua. Now I knew, having stayed over at her house many times, that Baba suffered from nightmares, waking up screaming, uttering desperate cries for help, certain she barely escaped being chased in a dark alley. But while awake, she was never one of those women who drowned in a glass of water. She refused to recognize the trauma she'd been through of losing home twice in her life. But I, her granddaughter, had to look straight into the eye of the trauma. I admit, I have needed a soft heart. I have needed poetic words. I have needed to know it's okay sometimes to drown in a glass of water. Today, our sense of home is so precarious that we have no choice but to embrace our vulnerability and to write as only writers with an immigrant soul can do, with the humility of knowing that tomorrow all that is familiar might be taken from us, but that we must guard our shared humanity, our most precious jewel of all, with our very lives, and cherish it always. Thank you.
Hi, that was wonderful. I'm really kind of intrigued by the whole idea of the Jew in Cuba during the revolution. And when your parents left, what was that about? How were Jews treated in Cuba during the revolution?
Great question. I'm happy to answer that. I've examined that so much over all the years. So the interesting thing to know is that the Communist Party in Cuba, one of the key founders of the Communist Party in Cuba, was a Jewish immigrant from Poland who arrived in 1924, and in 1925 he was helping to found the Communist Party in Cuba. And there were so many Jews at the founding of the Communist Party in Cuba that they had to have a Yiddish translator who could translate from Spanish to Yiddish. I mean, that's how crazy. So Jews were very much, part of the communist ideology, particularly in the 20s. But many changed their ideology as the years went on and as they became prosperous in Cuba in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So you have to imagine this community of immigrants that came, the Sephardic ones from Turkey, the Ashkenazi Jews coming from Eastern Europe, from Poland and Russia and Hungary and so on. And they settled in Cuba and they felt very at home in Cuba. They didn't experience the anti-Semitism. Those that were from Eastern Europe in particular had experienced great anti-Semitism in their home countries, and they arrived in Cuba, and it was like a breath of fresh air. This is something that my maternal grandmother would always say. And in the book, Letters from Cuba, I make her younger in the book, and she's discovering this place where she's not hated, she's not seen with contempt. And so the Jews felt very at home in Cuba, and by the 50s, they had really settled into life in Cuba. And there was a big community in Havana, but there were smaller communities around the island. In Santiago de Cuba, on the eastern end of the island, there was also a synagogue, and there were other synagogues around the country. And what's interesting is that by the late 50s, just on the eve of the revolution, they were so settled in Havana in particular that they built a Jewish community center. Those of you, I know some of you have been to Cuba, you probably have seen the big Jewish community center that has a big arch in front of it. And so they were very settled, very at home. They planned to stay in Cuba forever. They were, building the Jewish Community Center in the late 50s. But then with the revolution, the community by then had become a community largely of people that were merchants and store owners, and they owned mom and pop shops. And they were very supportive of the revolution at first. But then, after 61, after the Baby Pigs invasion, that's when Fidel Castro declared that the revolution was going to be a communist revolution. It wasn't clear until then exactly what direction it was going to take. And they began to nationalize private properties. They had initially nationalized large properties like oil companies, United Fruit, all of these big American companies that were in Cuba. But then they started nationalizing Cuban stores and mom and pop shops. People that were street peddlers couldn't peddle on the street anymore. You couldn't be, a street vendor. And that really scared the Jewish community, because they had worked really hard to be these store owners, these merchants, and their properties were confiscated. Although not just theirs, the properties of all Cubans who have property. And so the vast majority chose to leave. 90% of that community leaves in the early 60s. And that's when I left as a child. I was 4.5, and that's when I left with my family. And we went to New York, and then part of the family eventually moved to Miami, because as you know, most of the Cuban community in the US is in Miami. And so that's what happened. And when I wanted to go to Cuba at first, my parents thought it was just crazy of me to want to go to Cuba. Why would you want to go there? It's a communist country. It's the country we had to leave. Thanks to all our sacrifices, look at all the things you've been able to do because we left Cuba and now you want to go back to this place. It was very, very difficult. And my mother, I will never forget this, one of the first things she said to me is, be careful with those communists because, you're very easily talked into things. They're going to say all these nice things about communism and you're going to think it's good and it's not good. And, so I went with the anthropologist spirit. I want to talk to everybody. I want to know what they think and who they are. And there were several Cuban Jews who were very much a part of the revolution. Small number, probably, we're talking about maybe a dozen people, but who became very active in the revolution. There was a man named Fabio Grobat, who actually was this, founder of the Communist Party, and he would introduce Fidel Castro at the meeting. So anyways, so there was this Jewish presence in the Cuban Revolution, how's this? This is better. Okay. So there were Jewish Cubans involved in the revolution. I interviewed several of them for my book, An Island Called Home. So there were, several that were involved, but the majority chose the capitalist path and chose to leave Cuba and start a new life in the United States. And now there's a very large community of Cuban Jews in Miami. And because there's so many of them, this is what I like about going to Miami. When I'm anywhere else in the United States, I have to explain how I can be Jewish and Cuban. It always seems so weird to people. And I have to, give my whole genealogy and explain my immigrant story. But when I go to Miami, there's no need to explain because there's so many Cuban Jews that if you just start telling them, they go, yeah, you're a Cuban. That's it, you're a Cuban. It's like they've got a category for us, So I feel very at home in Miami. I don't have to explain my identity to anybody there. Everybody knows what a Cuban is in Miami because there's a large community. And in fact, the Cuban Jews ended up building 2 synagogues in Miami as well because they didn't feel very welcome by the American Jewish community that didn't know what to make of these people that were Cubans, spoke Spanish, ate black beans. What kind of Jews were these? And so they had to build their own synagogues and create their own communities because they didn't really feel, totally at home in the Miami Jewish community. So I hope that answers the question.
So nice to hear you and see you again. I'm Judith. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about the exodus of Jews in the last 15, 20 years to Israel, that Israel created some kind of a thing where Cuban Jews could go to Israel, many of them ended up in Miami. But can you talk a little bit about that whole business?
Yes, so that's a very interesting question. So there have been many Jews from Cuba since the mid-90s have been leaving for Israel. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon. I have followed some of these people. I've been to Israel to see the people that I knew in Cuba who left and decided to make aliyah, as they say, to immigrate to Israel. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon because basically Israel supports these kinds of demographic movements. Israel always wants more Jews to come and live in Israel, and Cuban Jews really need support to make a trip like this because they don't have any money. Cubans earn the equivalent of $20 a month, so people can't possibly do this on their own. But the Israeli government makes it possible for Jews in Cuba to immigrate if they want to. They'll pay for the trip, they'll pay for the passport, they provide housing for the first year, they provide a stipend, they provide Hebrew lessons. So it's been a very enticing offer to many Jews in Cuba who have basically reconnected with their Jewish identity. Because you have to remember, this is maybe something I didn't explain very well, that during the era of the revolution in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, those 3 decades, Cuba essentially made it impossible for people to have a religious identity. You couldn't claim to believe in God and get a university education in Cuba during those 3 main decades of the revolution. Then in the 90s, Cuba opened up to religion and made it possible for people to have a religious identity and be a communist if they wanted to, which is a very interesting thing. You could be a member of the Communist Party, and you could be a Jew, a Catholic, Protestant, whatever it was. It's also that the 90s is the time when all of these Afro-Cuban religions also revitalized. And so people who knew they had some Jewish ancestry started reconnecting with this identity. And many learned about Israel and the history of Israel and became interested in going. And then Israel made it possible for people to immigrate there. And then the Cuban government doesn't place any obstacles in the way of Jews in Cuba who wish to immigrate. So it's both good and bad. The good thing is that if people want to leave, they can. It's a place they can go to. Many stay in Israel, but there are also many who eventually leave and go to Miami, which is kind of, again, the second Cuba. Some people, Cubans joke around a lot, and they'll say, yeah, Miami, that's North Cuba, So a lot of people want to go to North Cuba. And so some of the people that immigrate to Israel eventually I find them in Miami. Eventually, but others end up staying in Israel, and I made a movie a long time ago called Adiós Querida, and I interviewed 2 young people, 2 young Afro-Cuban kids who were also Jewish and Afro-Cuban. They had the 2 backgrounds. And those 2 kids, really, they were 12 at the time, they were really eager to one day live in Israel. They had just come to feel that that was their true home. And they eventually left with their families, and they live in Israel today. It's really interesting. I've followed up with them. So it's another diaspora. It's these diasporas keep moving in different directions, and I find it really interesting with these 2 young people that I knew them in Cuba, and I got to hang out with them in Cuba many times over the years. And then when I've seen them in Israel, it's so amazing because they speak perfect Hebrew now, and they identify as Israeli. And I can read Hebrew, but I'm not a Hebrew speaker. And so it's so amazing how they have really become, much more Jewish in that sense than I am myself. So it's all of these very, very interesting journeys and movements that I've been able to follow. So thanks for your question. That was very nice, Jim.
Gracias por tus palabras. Me parecieron una poesía completa y un cuento maravilloso. Yo quería preguntarte, porque me impactó mucho que tú dijeras que la primera vez que contactaste realmente la risa fue en Cuba. Entonces, poniendo la risa y la magia en tu vida, me gustaría saber para ti cuáles serían tus casas 1, 2 y 3 en el mundo.
Should I translate the question?
Pues la otra no la tradujiste. A mí me gustaría que la contestaras en español.
¿Esta que la contesta en español?
Sí.
Okay. Entonces, I'm going to answer in Spanish and then I'll translate it to English. Entonces, bueno, lo de la risa me encanta que me lo hayas preguntado. Creo que en Cuba, porque los cubanos tienen un sentido del humor muy particular, y aunque lo escuché, de niña en Estados Unidos, escuchando los chistes de mi papá y otros familiares, no es igual que estar en Cuba. y oír ciertas palabras que solamente las dicen los cubanos. Y eso, no sé, me da una risa a veces. Cosas, tontas, a lo mejor, no sé si me parece que es muy cubano decirle a alguien que te voy a dar un piñazo. Eso me parece que es muy cubano. Entonces hay ciertas expresiones que cuando las oigo en Cuba como que me da, no sé, una sensación de como de reconectar con mi niñez a lo mejor, y a lo mejor eso me da cierto sentido de inocencia. Y en Cuba como que siempre soy la niña otra vez en Cuba, porque yo era la niña en Cuba y me fui de niña, entonces por eso soy la niña vieja, ahora soy la niña vieja, pero me da como una alegría estar ahí y ver los lugares donde yo andaba de niña, el parque donde jugaba, la parte del malecón donde yo caminaba con mis padres, o sea, no sé, me da una alegría muy grande poder estar ahí, aunque mis padres, o sea, la tragedia es que mis padres no han querido ir porque quisiera compartir esa alegría con ellos, pero ellos no quieren ir. Y ya yo creo que no los voy a poder convencer. Entonces es una risa, pero a la misma vez es un poco de melancolía también, que lo tengo que hacer yo sola. Aquellos que tienen tantos recuerdos no han ido. Y yo, que no me recuerdo mucho porque era tan chiquita, yo soy la que voy. Y bueno, me da una sensación de risa. Mis amigos, como el que vieron, Rolando Esteves, él puede ser muy serio, pero también me dice unos chistes a veces, dice unas cosas que me hacen reír a carcajadas, que eso no hay muchas personas que me puedan hacer reír como él. Entonces por eso lo decía. En cuanto a los hogares, 1, 2 y 3, muy difícil, muy difícil, porque pienso ahora que tengo hogares múltiples. Y, o sea, me encanta estar en México ahora que estoy aquí, estoy encantada de la vida, estoy con Sandra y estoy encantada, de verdad, siento como que puedo estar aquí siempre, pero cuando estoy en Cuba también, o sea, aunque hablé de un poco de miedo que tengo a la misma vez, pero también mucha alegría. Nueva York creo que siempre será un lugar muy importante para mí, es donde me crié, es la ciudad donde se cruza todo el mundo, se mezcla todo el mundo. Así que bueno, Nueva York creo que siempre va a ser un lugar importante, y aunque casi nunca lo menciono, vivo en Michigan, y siempre quiero, no siempre, cuando me preguntan de dónde eres, nunca digo de Michigan, porque no soy de Michigan, me parece que no soy de ahí, pero he vivido ahí más de 30 años, y ha sido un lugar muy importante en mi vida, en mi historia. Pero siempre siento que estoy ahí como prestada. No estoy ahí, no.
¿Te ríes mucho en Michigan?
No tanto. A veces sí me río en Michigan. So let me try to translate that. So Maria Belen asked me about, I said that in Cuba, I often feel scared, but it's also a place where I laugh and feel joy, boundless joy, as I haven't felt anywhere else. And, so she wanted me to talk about that, and I did, and I talked about how there's just words that I hear in Cuba, words that are kind of funny to me because they're words that I heard as a child, and then I hear them in Cuba, and I just kind of, something clicks. But also there's a very particular Cuban sense of humor that's kind of, it's like humor on adrenaline almost in Cuba, because you just, these jokes that maybe I hear them now and then with my father or other family members making a joke, but in Cuba it's constant. And so I laugh a lot there. I laugh at jokes. My friend Rolando Esteves, who makes the handmade books, he can be very melancholy, but he also can be hilariously funny, and he just makes me just crack up and laugh, and so that's a really wonderful thing for me about being in Cuba. And then Maria Belen wanted to know, what are my homes, like 1, 2, 3, and I said that I really can't do that. I feel like I have multiple homes, a multiple sense of home. I feel like I have found home in so many places, and I feel so at home right now in Mexico, and have from the time I started coming to Mexico many, many years ago, and with Sandra especially, feel extremely at home here. Of course, Cuba too, even though there's that bit of fear. New York, because that's where I grew up, and I feel like you cross paths with people from everywhere in New York, and it's one of the things I'll always love about New York. And then I mentioned Michigan, and that I always feel a little funny when people say to me, "Oh, are you from Michigan?" And I always go, "No, I'm not from Michigan." And I have to, explain that I was, born in Cuba, I grew up in New York, and I live in Michigan, but I'm not from Michigan. And I don't know why I'm so, so concerned about that, but I guess I feel like I'm not really from the Midwest, and I just don't want to confuse anybody. But it's a place that really has been an important home to me. I've lived there for over 30 years and been a professor in Michigan for a long time, and it's a place that really has been a base from where I travel to so many other places. So I also have to mention it as one of my homes as well. So I think on that note, I want to thank all of you. You've been just such a lovely audience. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you.